What's up everybody, and welcome back to this series. I'm Calvin Maclure. On August 20th, 1968, the mission of Gemini 8 roared to life on its way to a hoped-for record-setting endurance flight of 14 days. Packed with enough supplies to ensure a possible stay of 15 days should the extra time be required, the crew of Gemini 8, after reaching orbit, got as comfortable as one could in the tiny two-seater capsule and settled in for what would be a marathon mission. The mission had two major objectives. The first, test the limits of the body's ability to endure and cope with the zero-G environment for such long durations. The second, to test out a new technology which would be critical for lunar missions: fuel cells. The new state-of-the-art technology used liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, both stored at cryogenic temperatures, and combined them to produce electricity to supply the spacecraft's various electrical loads, as well as a fortunate byproduct, water, to supply the crew's life support needs. During the first 8 of the 14-day stay, the crew would be tasked with little more than assessing their evolving physical and mental states as orbit after orbit saw them go from one sunrise to another, one sunset to another, every 90 minutes. Additionally, Ford and Brewer monitored the spacecraft's electrical systems, exchanging back and forth with ground controllers, engineers also monitoring telemetry on their side. Everyone had agreed that should the system begin to show some signs of malfunction, the mission would have to be aborted. In order to help pass the time, the crew was encouraged to take as many photographs of the various landscapes they saw and deemed stunning enough to capture, as the agency hoped that the fruits of their labors in doing so would help lead to a greater appreciation of Earth's fragile environment and garner greater public support for the space program. Launching 8 days into the mission of Gemini 8, the troublesome launch of the Agena after a botched staging from the Atlas that left engineers and ground controllers both troubled and perplexed, and the Agena, in a roll, came close to sabotaging the second phase of the mission. But the Agena would recover after its main propulsion unit fired successfully. After ground controllers had given the all-clear, all that was now left to do for the crew of Gemini 8 was rendezvous and dock.
Alright, nice and easy now. Let's get her done. Smooth sailing, babe. Okay, 4 left, 3 left. Okay, rotation rates look good. Bring her in, babe. There we go, I got it. Got it. Houston, please be advised and tell the missus the package is hot.
With the Agena and the Gemini now docked, the remainder of the mission, 7 days, could begin. Never before had two crafts remained docked in orbit for such an extended duration. Engineers ground controllers, and mission planners alike were eager to test this to try and weed out as many issues as might come up. It had already been established that the trip to the moon would require just such an architecture. Further, the Agena would be used to boost the apogee to a new record altitude, providing further invaluable insight into the hazards of flying in and out of the Van Allen belts.
Hey, look at that. Sun's in our eyes again. Yeah, how about that? 100th time this mission. Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, sorry about that, fellas. We'll try to make sure to only fly by at night next time.
Using the Agena's secondary propulsion unit, Gemini 8 slowed down just enough, decoupled from the Agena, the two crafts slowly drifting apart from one another, and a tired and spent crew made their way back home, eagerly anticipating the moment when both hatches would be opened. After an exhausting 14 days of looking at beautiful landscapes, taking not a few pictures, busily fighting off boredom, save the odd few system vital checks, the tired and smelly crew of Gemini 8 found its way back home, safe and sound, ending one of the most demanding missions on a high note. Shortly after the return of the successful, record-setting Gemini 8 mission, Gemini 9 roared to life on its way for an 8-day scientific mission. Though somewhat less high-profile of an assignment, the crew of Allen and Jacobs could not be bothered less about that fact. They were just happy to be back at it again. The one new addition to the spacecraft's evolving hardware the crew was tasked with testing was the addition of porthole windows. The windows, mounted just above the crew's heads, allowed for noticeably improved visibility to the outside world. On December 21st, 1968, Gemini 9 splashed down in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Valkyrie 3, the third installment of the daring lunar sample return missions, launched towards the most challenging landing site yet attempted. Save a minor out-of-sequence staging event during ascent, Valkyrie 3 made it safely to its parking orbit. The problematic center insulation panel did eventually, under the gentle care of the microgravity environment, peel off and float away. Right on time, Centaur fired both of its engines, and Valkyrie 3 was on its way to its lunar destination. Once both spacecraft separated successfully from one another, both were now headed for an impact trajectory on the Moon's northern pole. Scientists hoped that once crewed missions to the surface would be underway, the more dynamic region of the lunar poles could be a prime candidate for landings. When the time came, Valkyrie 3's avionics units were brought out of sleep and its engines fired to slow its descent down to touchdown. Geologists had long known that the most interesting and revealing regions of the regolith are typically the most dynamic as well as terrifying to visit. Robotic exploration could only provide so much, however invaluable the data thus far collected had been. It would require the gentle and dexterous touch of the hand, as well as wisdom and discernment of the mind, to go the next step. Some 4.5 days later, Valkyrie touched down on the lunar surface in a region known simply as the Northern Lowlands. Staying only just as long as was needed for sample collection, the tiny little ascent stage fired up its engines and headed back home, carrying with it all 54 grams of its precious cargo. The trip back, by now almost routine, involved a little more than a gentle and patient coast phase, while the skeleton crew back on the ground monitored key vitals and trajectory indicators to make sure all was well. The full crew would assemble back at mission control some 8 hours prior to touchdown. Recovery crews, unable to work in the darkness of the night, would have to wait until sunrise before the precious lunar cargo could be retrieved. In the month of January 1969, the top brass of the intelligence community delivered a damning message to the president from the most recent U-2 overflight. In a moment of absolute urgency, a repeat flight with another U-2 was scrambled and sent aloft to further investigate the findings. What its onboard film camera footage would reveal was devastating. Under presidential orders, the agency was told in no uncertain words, "Get to the moon, now."
Okay, 130 mark.
How does one transform a small, two-seater spacecraft, the most technologically advanced of its time, and completely revolutionize its identity? The answer? By taking one giant leap forward and dare mighty things. What the agency was now busy preparing, with the fullness of its might, would be televised the world over. Millions of people would be watching the events unfold live as they occurred. Should the unthinkable happen, it was paramount that the crew have a means of safe escape. Step 1 in the Gemini transformation program was a series of demonstration flights of the updated launch escape system. Step 2, take your upgraded spacecraft and make sure it can take the heat. A modified Titan 34B, equipped with an Agena third stage, headed skywards, taking along with it a modified Gemini capsule, the same as had been used on the Gemini 2 mission. The capsule was retrofitted, filled to the brim with sensors and telemetry units, repurposed to the necessary extent, and mated to its Titan booster. The uncrewed spacecraft was headed for a suborbital flight trajectory with an apogee and perigee values set such that it would help mimic the sort of intense reentry heating which was to be expected on the upcoming mission. At apogee, Once engineers gave the command, a series of pyrotechnic bolts were fired, and the Gemini was separated from its Agena ride. Both crafts headed for a very heated re-entry. All engineers and ground crew were left to do now was wait until the capsule would reach the atmosphere. Once it did that, they would watch the telemetry, monitoring every telemetry unit to make sure everything stayed within margins. As the capsule hit the upper atmosphere, at speeds exceeding those ever seen before by a Gemini, the capsule was at once engulfed by a raging inferno. After a few fiery and tense moments, the capsule, much to the delight of engineers, re-emerged intact, telemetry streams coming back to life. Since the capsule carried no crew with it on board during the flight, there were no plans to recover it after the flight. Parachutes were deliberately omitted. After several highly successful trips to the moon by the most powerful rocket yet developed, the agency knew exactly where to turn to for their next flight. Though never previously man-rated per se, and with less than half a dozen launches to its name thus far, there truly stood only one launch vehicle capable of performing the next task the agency had in mind. Upgraded with slightly larger, more powerful, more capable solid rocket boosters to help give it just a little extra push off the pad, appeasing, even if only just, the fears of many mission planners and engineers, the mightiest of Titans was ready to receive the final piece of the puzzle. For the first time ever, the Gemini was mated to a different booster, for it was headed to a very different type of mission and destination. Assembled and integrated in record time as ground crews, technicians, and engineers from hundreds of contractors and subcontractors across the country fought to make the aggressive deadlines, Gemini 10, known officially as Gemini Lunar Flyby, or simply as the Flyby mission, finally arrived at the pad. As of yet, Titan 3CB stood as the heavyweight champion, both in terms of size and weight on the pad, and in terms of what it could take with it off the pad. The sheer size of the rocket drew crowds from all over to try and take advantage of whatever little time that was made available to them, while the rocket stood waiting patiently for the appointed time to launch. What made this spectacle all that much more incredible was the nature of the mission it had been made for. What ultimately drew the greatest source of criticism for the mission, however, was the selection of the crew. Though both veteran flyers from Mercury, neither had previously flown on Gemini. But as some saw it, they were first in, and as such, first in line. With both rocket and spacecraft now safely waiting on the pad, the crew eager to go, and everyone waiting for the heavenly planes to align, the whole world waited, watched, and held its breath for history to unfold.
Here is an illustrated summary of the news. It'll be followed by the latest film of events and happenings at home and abroad.
Good evening and welcome to this special bulletin of the BBC Nightly News. I'm Christopher Wallace. Over in America, at this very moment, we are told the brave crew of Gemini 10 have finished suiting up and are now entering their small spacecraft. Ground crews are strapping them in and checking every switch, bell and whistle to be absolutely sure the crew have a safe and successful journey on this most momentous of events in the history of Kerbal kind. Back in Houston, Mission Control is standing at the ready, performing every last-minute check on the Titan booster rocket, poised to take the first Kerbals ever on a journey to the moon. From all of us here at the BBC, we bid them Godspeed, safe journeys, and good luck.
Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 1 minute and 50 seconds. We now have confirmation here in the control center that the update received on T-minus 20. We're checking the blockhouse. All systems looking for T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
For the very first time in history, the stuff of legends from all over, two Kerbals riding the most powerful rocket ever devised, risking their lives, leaving loved ones behind, carrying the hopes and dreams of millions along with them, were on their way. As ground crews and engineers in Mission Control and Kennedy Space Center feverishly analyzed and watched the live telemetry streams beaming down from the rocket's many sensors, monitoring vehicle health, doctors from Mission Control monitored heart rates and breathing from the crew, noting their obvious excitement and keeping track of their health. Gemini 10 made it safely to orbit, completing the first part of this most daring of adventures. The mighty Titan had yet again delivered when it mattered most.
She sure gave us one hell of a ride, didn't she?
Raj, we read your Miko. Welcome to space. Be sure to go to item 6 on your checklist.
While the crew could breathe a short sigh of relief, there was little time to sit back. Less than 45 minutes sat between them and TLI, and the crew of Gemini 10 had one more item off their list. Shrouded away as though hidden away in secrecy, the DLSEP, or Diversified Lunar Science Experiments Package, was a last-minute addition to the mission.
Okay, we can see you turning around now.
Yep, turn around. Let's get it right where I want her. Get it right where I want her.
With the Gemini now safely docked to the DLSEP unit, and it still safely docked to the Centaur, ground crews continued to monitor the combined spacecraft's many vitals. If anything was amiss, now was the time to abort. The crew would assume a rear-facing orientation for the TLI burn, as engineers and mission controls feared that should the Gemini be unable to decouple from the booster, best have such an event occur while still in the relative safety of low Earth orbit. Some 45 minutes into the mission control uttered words never before said in any previous crewed mission.
Gemini, this is Houston. You're go for TLI.
Copy that. Go with TLI.
At the exact moment planned, the Centaur came to life for what was arguably its most important task ever to date. Just like that, with both engines shutting down right on time, and with minimal residuals, Gemini 10 was moonbound. After getting the all-clear from mission control, Gemini 10 undocked the DLSEP from Centaur. The only thing now between them and the moon was time.
Houston 10 here. I don't know if you guys are getting this, but the view. My God.
Raj, we're getting some of the feeds on the mains here. Sure is quite a sight.
Oh man, it's really getting small now. Just look at that.
Yeah, must be quite the experience. The feed's coming back down here just fine, thanks for that.
Yes, sir. Sure is. Man, I can hide the whole thing under my thumb. I can hide the whole thing under my thumb.
The announcement that a manned Gemini mission to the moon was in the works sent a small group of scientists and engineers into a hurried frenzy. Though not initially a part of the mission plan at all, they realized that this was a golden opportunity not to be missed out on. The relatively low mass of the Gemini capsule and its service module, coupled with the lifting capacity of the Titan, meant there were weight merchants, and engineers and scientists saw no justification not to take advantage of this. Weighing in at just over 1 metric ton, the unique and odd-looking contraption would serve no other purpose than to peer deeper into the still mysterious lunar environment, particularly when it came to studies of the biological sort. On board was a fuel cell, exactly sized for the added electrical loads, an advanced biological capsule containing fruit flies, various fungi and bacteria, twin identical biological canisters to better assess the lunar radiation levels at different points, a low-resolution photography and cache return system for studying future potential landing sites, a high-resolution imaging device for targeted imaging of targets of interest, and a small satellite nicknamed Tinkerbell, destined for a highly elliptical lunar orbit. Once jettisoned, ground controllers would henceforth be the ones to care for little Tinkerbell.
Mission Control is saying that at this point in time, Spacecraft should be reaching the moon's sphere of influence. Spacecraft is currently around 236,000 miles from Earth.
For as long as there had been ice capable of peering up into the night skies, the moon had been there looking back. Beyond shaping our tides, lighting our way at night, and feeling its pull on us, down to our very souls, the moon was in many ways as much a part of us as of the heavenlies. It shaped our dreams, our beliefs, our hopes and inspirations. It helped shape our calendars and the keeping of time. But most of all, it had helped shape us, forever inspiring those who would dare to look up and reach out as though touching its face. Now, more than ever, fiction and dream had become reality. And it was all happening through the crew of Gemini 10. Single combat warriors, as it were. Ambassadors of a distant place.
Holy moly, would you look at that? Take a look at those craters.
Yeah, I see him.
Look at the size of that one. Man, those craters are just everywhere. They're all over the place.
Oh, wait, yeah, hold on a second. Where's the... Hey, is that the card over there? I think I see the cards over there.
Yeah, you're right, we sure do.
I like Reno better.
Hey, look there. There's Copernicus crater. Man, that is one scary looking sight. Man, I just cannot believe this. Houston, you don't know what you're missing up here.
Yeah, I hope I didn't miss anything, because, yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
Rog, thanks for that. We'll be sure to look at the pictures once you get back.
Now, no longer so far away, the once distant gaze of the moon evoked a whole new sense of awe for the crew and for many back on Earth.
10, Houston. We'll see you on the other side.
In the relative vicinity of the dark side of the moon, lost in the grandeur of the Gemini mission, Tinkerbell fired its engines and cemented herself in the history books as the first lunar satellite to be launched from another craft already in space. Placed in a highly elliptical orbit, Tinkerbell would remain there indefinitely.
Rise and shine. How's goes it?
Please be advised, there is a Santa Claus.
Okay. Read you loud and clear.
In a moment of time that seemed to last both forever and but for an instant, the static on the radio informed the crew that their time spent in the shadow of the moon's far side was over. It would be, for this part of the journey, the crew's only respite. Now emerging on the other side of the moon, the crew of Gemini 10 was back hard at work, taking as many pictures as they could of the lunar surface. The information gathered from both sides as the spacecraft arrived and left the moon would later prove to be invaluable additions to what had already been gathered by robotic probes. But just like that, almost as quickly as it had come, it was now gone again. The spacecraft on a free return trajectory was racing back home through no other means than the simple laws of orbital mechanics. Thomas and Sanders took every opportunity they could to do meaningful work, but when the distance was too great, they took advantage of their privileged perspective to simply take it all in as best as they could. For the remainder of the trip, the crew rested and thought back at what had just transpired to them. The thought of one day going to the moon had been in the imagination of Kerbal kind for centuries. Lo and behold, here they were, the two of them, as though destined since before time as the chosen ones to make dreams a reality. In the final moments of their flight, moments before re-entry checklists would be passed over, the crew undocked from the DLSEP, several experiments having unfortunately malfunctioned, and moved to a safe distance. As for the DLSEP, it would certainly meet a most fiery end to its journey. The final 3 items on their checklists were decouple from the service module, arm the parachutes, and activate the re-entry autopilot, which would, as its first operation, set the capsule in a rear-facing re-entry position. Now, no matter what they did, Gemini was going to hit the atmosphere at alarming speeds never before experienced by any Kerbal. All the crew could now do was brace for the heat and hope the engineers had done their job. Sanders and Thomas would later recall the re-entry as nothing they had quite imagined, and probably hotter than walking on the sun. But all kidding aside, the crew of Gemini 10 were heroes and were greeted as such. For the next several weeks, they would tour the country to thank factory worker after factory worker for all of their hard-earned work.